Some people walk into a wedding venue and feel warmth, the pull of shared bloodlines, the sparkle of reunion, the quiet hum of legacy. I felt none of that. I felt cold glass and curated exclusion. The moment I stepped into the Harbor View Pavilion, 30 miles outside Portland, Oregon, I knew. It wasn't the music. A string quartet was playing a soft rendition of Can't Help Falling in Love. It wasn't the decor. White roses coiled around golden frames and flickering candles lined the aisles. It was the way no one looked at me. Not even once. The valet took my car with polite indifference. The planner handed me a place card with a smile that ended an inch before her eyes. And my mother? She turned her head slightly, as if I had interrupted a thought she hadn't needed in years. Welcome, Elise. No hug, no warmth. Just my name, pronounced like an obligation. I hadn't come to make a scene. It was Colin's wedding, my only brother. We hadn't been close in a long time. He chose a corporate life, built in polished boardrooms and holiday cards with embossed logos. I left. I freelanced, skipped family brunches, said no without needing permission. But I was still his sister. I thought that meant something. Apparently I was wrong. I held the ivory place card like it might bleed. Table 14C, near the service hallway, past the restrooms, next to the coat check. The seating chart stopped at table 10. Mine wasn't listed. I approached the coordinator, Diane, headset clipped neatly to her blazer, and asked if there'd been a mistake. She glanced at her tablet. No mistake, she said flatly. That's where your family asked us to seat you. I stood there for a moment too long, unsure whether to laugh or crumble. Not angry, not yet. Just hollow. Like someone had scooped me out and left enough weight to stand, but nothing to feel. The hallway was dim, as if lit on purpose to be forgettable. My table was pressed against the wall, 2 chairs, one of them wobbly, a candle with no scent, a paper napkin that didn't match the linen inside the ballroom. The draft from the utility door made the tablecloth flutter like it wanted to escape. Guests passed in silk dresses and pressed tuxedos, their shoes clicking like punctuation marks. Some glanced at me. A few smiled at me the way people do when they assume you're staff. It would have been easier to believe this was an accident, but I knew better. I'd seen my mother's RSVP handwriting. I'd felt Colin's silence in every unreturned call. And when Serena, the bride, smirked as I walked in, I understood. They didn't make mistakes. They made decisions. My parents, Howard and Lorraine, sat dead center, draped in orchids, velvet chairs, champagne glasses kissed with edible gold. And me? I was behind a fire extinguisher. I used to tell myself I was just different, independent, a little outside the mold. I made peace with being not the favorite. I forgave forgotten birthdays, canceled dinners, and joint Christmas cards that only featured Colin's name in cursive gold. But this wasn't an oversight. This was choreography. I texted Abby, my cousin. "Are you in the main room?" She replied instantly. "Yeah, center table near the photo booth. Didn't see your name on the chart? Are you here?" Are you here? Like I was a rumor, a misplaced invitation, a ghost. Maybe I was. A waiter passed by. I stopped him, asked quietly if there was anywhere else I could be seated. He paused. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Seating's locked. We were told this spot was final." Final. That word hit harder than any slap. Just then, through the glass, I caught the reflection of a woman in emerald green, Serena's college roommate maybe, laughing with a group near the dessert station. She turned, saw me. Her expression flickered. Recognition, pity, amusement. Then she turned back, like I hadn't been there at all. I looked down at my dress. Deep plum. A cut I'd debated for 2 weeks. Simple heels, clean curls. I'd dressed for grace, for respect, for an olive branch no one asked for, but I had no seat, no role, no story. And that's what hurt most. It wasn't the chair, it wasn't the hallway, it was the message, the one they'd written in every silence, every brush-off, every forgotten call. You're not part of this family story. Not really. Not where it counts. They didn't forget me. They erased me. and I let them. I stared through the ballroom glass, at the laughter, the chandeliers, the toast of champagne and the flicker of gold, and I saw it clearly for the first time. This wasn't rejection. It was performance. A stage crafted by people who had practiced pretending so long they thought invisibility was love. And I wasn't part of the act. I looked down at my place card. The edge was curled now, damp from my fingers. They had chosen this seat. Carefully. Quietly. But I didn't have to stay in it. They didn't put me out here because they forgot. They put me here so I wouldn't be in the photo. That's when I stood, not with rage, but with clarity, because this wasn't the beginning of their wedding day. It was the beginning of my story, the family story no one planned for me to tell. I didn't leave immediately. I stood by that hallway table, half lit by a flickering wall sconce, nearly swallowed by a tower of winter coats, and watched the ballroom spin around without me. The laughter from inside was louder now, as if someone had dialed it up intentionally, like joy on command. I kept waiting for someone to notice, a cousin, an uncle, anyone to walk over, tilt their head and say, "Why are you sitting out here? Come on in." But no one did, because no one was surprised. And then came the twist, not from the planner, not from my mother, but from two women walking behind me. They didn't see me as they passed. Their voices were hushed, but clear enough to cut through everything else. "They put the sister in the back?" one asked. Apparently she wasn't even on the original list. I heard the groom's partner insisted she be added. I froze. Not on the list? The women kept walking, never looking back. One held a gold clutch. The other had a feathered shawl that brushed against my elbow as they passed. I don't know if they realized I was Elise, the sister they were talking about. Maybe they thought I was staff. Maybe they didn't care. I stepped away from the table, walked back toward the check-in desk. Diane, the coordinator, was still there, typing on her tablet with one hand and sipping coffee with the other. She looked up as I approached, eyes flicking with practiced politeness. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm. "I overheard something, that I wasn't on the original guest list?" She didn't flinch, just blinked slowly, like I'd asked her about the weather. "I'm not sure where you heard that," she said. "But yes. Your name was added a few days ago. Column 4 of the seating doc. Different font. That's usually a last-minute entry." Different font. Even her explanation felt like a memo. I nodded slowly, then looked past her toward the seating chart on the easel again. I'd assumed I was forgotten. I hadn't realized I was almost excluded. "Who added me?" I asked. She looked down at her screen, then back at me. "The groom's fiancé, Theo." That broke something in me I didn't realize was still intact. Not because of Theo, we'd only spoken a few times. I barely knew him. But he had insisted I be invited, which meant my own family hadn't. They were ready to celebrate a wedding without their only daughter, their only sister. And if Theo hadn't spoken up, I would have been left out. No explanation, no call, no apology, nothing. I walked slowly back down the hallway. My heels clicked against the tile in rhythm with my pulse. At the end of the corridor, tucked behind the bar and across from a set of ornate restrooms, was a utility exit marked "Service Only." And that's where my table sat. 2 chairs, 1 mismatched candle, a draft that made the linen ripple like even the air didn't want to stay. It wasn't a table, it was a placeholder, a social quota, and I had filled it. Back inside the ballroom, a slow song began to play. I could see Colin now, twirling Serena across the floor like they'd been rehearsing. His smile was perfect, his posture effortless, every hair in place, every movement choreographed. My mother stood just off to the side, hands folded like a proud director watching her production unfold without flaw. This wasn't a celebration, it was a performance, and I wasn't part of the cast. I had to get out of that hallway. I turned, walked briskly down a side corridor, and pushed open the double doors to the patio. Winter air hit me hard, 43 degrees and unforgiving, but it was the first thing that felt real. And that's when I saw Theo. He stood near the edge of the balcony, looking out over the harbor, His tux jacket was unbuttoned, his hands gripping the railing like he was anchoring himself to something invisible. I hadn't planned to speak to him, but somehow my steps kept moving until I was standing beside him. "Theo," I said. He turned, startled at first, then softened. "Elise," he said gently, "you found your seat?" I nodded. "More than that. I found out I wasn't supposed to have one." He didn't deny it, didn't dodge, just nodded, slow and heavy. "I didn't think it was right. When I saw the guest list and you weren't on it." He exhaled, his breath fogging in the air. "I asked Colin," he said, and he just said, "It's better this way. She'll probably decline anyway." I looked at him. "So he made the choice for me. I didn't want you to feel erased," I cut in. "Unwanted?" Theo looked at me carefully. His expression wasn't pity, it was something closer to recognition, like he'd stood in the hallway too, just in a different house. We stood in silence for a moment. Below us, the harbor lights shimmered like they were blinking in code. "Do you ever wonder," I asked, "if people only keep us around just enough to look decent?" He didn't answer right away, just stared out at the dark. "All the time," he said finally, "especially lately." And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just my story anymore. Something else was cracked, and it wasn't just me. I stepped back into the venue through a side door near the bar, brushing the cold off my skin, but not the chill in my chest. Inside, the lights were warmer, softer, calculated to flatter. Everyone, that is, except the one person standing outside for 20 minutes trying to remember if she had imagined the last 10 years of distance. This wedding, it had everything. A string quartet playing cinematic love themes, waitstaff dressed like they'd stepped out of a Michelin-starred kitchen, chairs draped in velvet, napkin rings that probably cost more than I made freelancing last month. But none of it had room for me. Everything had been designed for optics, for spectacle, for the illusion of family perfection. But when you know what to look for, when you've lived just outside the frame, you can spot every crack under the polish. In the main ballroom, a tall, glowing wall of roses marked the photo backdrop. Gold letters spelled out, "Serena and Colin, a love worth celebrating," across a white chiffon banner. And just beneath it, I spotted my mother adjusting the cuff of Colin's sleeve like this was a magazine shoot. I hovered near the bar, still technically invisible, still good at it. From this angle, I saw the seating arrangement in full. Table 1, bride, groom, parents. Table 2, Serena's extended family. Table 3, Colin's old lacrosse team. Table 4, the law firm partners he had schmoozed his way into. And so on. And then I saw it. A young woman I didn't recognize, seated at one of the main tables, laughing hard at something one of the groomsmen said. I leaned slightly to check her name card when she stepped away to hug someone. Claire, Serena's Pilates instructor. She had a place. I did not. A server passed with a tray of champagne, and I accepted a flute more for something to hold than to drink. The glass was chilled. My hands weren't. I wasn't shaking. I'd moved past shock into something quieter, something colder. And then my mother saw me. She didn't come to me. Of course not. She waved me over with 2 fingers, the kind of gesture you'd use to summon a hotel concierge. I obeyed. For a moment I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment she realized what she had done. That the seat, the exclusion, the near uninvitation, that she'd lean in and whisper something like, "I didn't know, I'm sorry." But what she said was, "Could you be a dear and fix the hem on your dress? It's dragging." That was it. That was her noticing me. "You didn't answer my question," I said, my voice steady. "Did you know I wasn't on the original guest list?" Her lips pressed into a smile that was barely held together. "Elise, not here." "That means yes." She looked around, panic flickering behind her eyes. But no one was listening. No one was looking. Because I was still doing what I always did, keeping my voice low enough to protect her reputation. "Theo added me," I continued, "because you all had planned a wedding without your only daughter. Do you have any idea what that feels like? She blinked. Once, slowly. Like she had nothing left to give me but indifference. "This day isn't about you," she said. "It never is," I replied. I turned, walking away before I said anything louder. I passed Colin on the way to the groom's table. He was beaming, champagne flute raised in one hand, the other gesturing to some story I'd never been invited to be part of. When he saw me, his smile faltered. Just a second. Then it snapped back into place. "Glad you could make it, Lisi," he said, using the nickname I hadn't heard in 6 years. It didn't land like he thought it would. "It's Elise," I said, and kept walking. I didn't return to the hallway. I couldn't stomach sitting next to a mop bucket just because it made everyone else comfortable. So I walked the perimeter of the ballroom, watching the family I was born into smile for cameras, pass around platters of truffle crab cakes, and toast to forever love like it wasn't built on silence and soft betrayal. That's when I overheard it. A woman in green, one of Serena's bridesmaids, whispering to someone with a camera strapped across his chest. "She's here just so it doesn't look bad. You know, social optics." "Who is?" "The sister. The one that lives out in Portland or wherever. Her mom didn't even want to invite her." That line hit harder than the seat assignment, because it confirmed everything. I wasn't invisible because they forgot me. I was invisible because they chose to hide me. I stepped into the bathroom, locked the stall. Saturday. Not to cry. I didn't cry. I just needed the quiet. A break from the curated chaos. I looked down at the dress I had spent 2 weeks debating. Deep plum, mid-thigh slit, understated heels, clean makeup, soft curls. I had dressed for grace, for redemption, for a second chance to belong. But this wasn't my redemption arc. It was a wake-up call. When I emerged, the music had shifted again, now upbeat. Someone had dimmed the lights more, making the crystal chandeliers glimmer like stars. A slow dance invitation was coming, but I had made my decision. I walked slowly to the coat check, gave my number, slipped into my camel wrap coat, the place card still folded in my palm. And just before I turned to go, I walked up to Diane, the planner. "Can you do me a favor?" I asked. She looked up. "Take this card," I said, placing it on her clipboard. "If anyone asks where I went, tell them I finally sat somewhere that fit." She nodded. I smiled. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was mine. Then I walked into the cold air, no longer carrying the need to be seen. I didn't get far. Just as the valet booth came into view, its soft yellow light flickering against the night fog, I heard my name. "Elise." I turned. Theo stood under the awning just outside the venue's side entrance. His bow tie was undone now, hanging loose like something had come unraveled. His breath fogged in the cold. "Got a second?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. We walked toward the edge of the property, where a small patio overlooked the trees sloping toward the Willamette River. The murmur of wedding music drifted from behind the walls, muffled now, as if the celebration was something happening in someone else's memory. Theo didn't speak right away. He leaned against the stone railing, staring out into the dark like it might answer for the people inside. "I know it's not my place," he said finally, "but I need to ask. What happened between you and your family?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so impossibly simple for a question that had taken me years to realize had no single answer. "Nothing," I said. "That's the worst part. Nothing ever happened. I just slowly disappeared." Theo exhaled. "Colin doesn't talk about you much. I figured you were estranged or—" He trailed off. "He doesn't talk about me," I echoed, more to myself than him. "That checks out." A beat passed. "But you know what's wild?" I added, shifting my weight. "I would have still come. I RSPD, bought a dress, booked a room. I even wrapped the gift myself." Theo looked over. "You brought a gift?" I nodded. "A framed photo from when we were kids. The 3 of us, Colin, me, and our dad, fishing near Cannon Beach. It was the last time I remember him actually needing me. He'd gotten his line tangled and I was the only one patient enough to help. Theo looked like he might say something but didn't. I kept going. I found the photo last month, touched it up, had it reprinted in black and white, thought it might mean something, thought maybe it would remind him I was part of this story once. Theo's eyes softened, but I wasn't finished. But when I gave it to him earlier, at the rehearsal dinner, he smiled and said, "Oh wow, I forgot we used to do that," then handed it off to someone else without even looking at it again. That was the moment. Not the seat by the door, not the missing name, not even the overheard whispers about being added last minute. It was that photo, that small act of offering history back to someone and watching them toss it like it was nothing. That was the betrayal that pierced deepest, because it wasn't malicious. It was careless. Theo's voice was quiet. "You deserved better than that." I turned to him. "So do you." His head snapped slightly. "What?" "I've seen the way he talks around you, like you're an accessory to the brand he's trying to build. Not a partner, not even a person. Just part of the aesthetic." Theo's jaw tightened. "He tells people I ground him, that I make him relatable." I raised an eyebrow. "Relatable?" "That's his word. His therapist told him he needs to appear more emotionally available. Apparently I'm the shortcut." That made me pause, because that wasn't just shallow, it was calculated. And suddenly, the curated perfection of the wedding, the matching colors, the luxury table settings, the orchestration, clicked into place. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a brand launch, and everyone in that ballroom was part of the marketing package. Theo took a long breath and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out his phone. His thumb hovered for a second, then tapped a message. He held it out to me. I scanned the screen. A text thread, from Colin to his stylist. "Just need him to keep it together through the honeymoon. After that, we pivot." Another one. "This wedding is a big PR move, we can't afford a meltdown." Another. "I've got the prenup backed up, just in case." My stomach dropped. I looked up. "He sent these?" Theo nodded. "I found them by accident. His tablet was unlocked one night. I wasn't snooping, but I haven't been able to unsee it since." "Does your mom know?" I asked. "She suspects something. She's been watching him all night." We stood in silence. The wind bit harder now. A car pulled into the valet loop behind us. Music drifted out through a crack in the kitchen door. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked. Theo didn't hesitate. "Because you're the only one here who doesn't pretend." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt still. Still like a lake after the storm has passed. Still like something is finally settling at the bottom. For years I had wondered if I'd imagined the distance, exaggerated the exclusion, read too much into the silences. But I hadn't. It was all real. And it wasn't just mine. That night, two people stood on the outside of a dramatic wedding built for appearances, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a supporting character. I felt like someone holding the script and deciding whether or not to flip the table. Weddings are supposed to be beginnings. But standing in the chill beside Theo, our breath fogging in the January night, it felt more like something was quietly ending. Something long overdue, something neither of us had dared name until now. He had shown me the messages, the kind of messages no one writes unless they assume the other person will never see them. And worse, the kind people only send when they think they've already won. We didn't say much as we walked back toward the building, not through the main entrance. Theo guided me through the service door, out of sight, through the staff corridor that smelled of champagne foam and warm bread. At the edge of the kitchen, just past the row of silver trays stacked for midnight snacks, Theo stopped and looked at me. "I don't know what I'm going to do," he said. "You don't have to do anything yet," I replied. "But you can choose not to keep pretending." He nodded once, and then he went left, back toward the groom's lounge. I turned right. I returned to the hallway first, where my coat still hung by the rack and my table still sat, untouched, unloved, almost poetic in how perfectly it mirrored my place in this family. But I didn't sit. Instead, I picked up the folded place card that bore my name and quietly tore it in half. No anger, no theatrical flair, just the silent finality of someone done playing along. I placed it under the empty water glass, wiped the corners of my eyes, and stepped back into the ballroom. The shift was almost comical. Guests were dancing now. Serena had changed into a second gown, sleek, backless, custom fit. The lights had dimmed to a soft amber, giving everyone that Instagram-ready glow. Laughter floated under the clinking of crystal, the perfect party, still spinning. And yet something was already off. Colin was missing. Theo was missing. Serena's smile looked tighter now, more posed than joyful. My mother sat stiffly at the head table, her jaw set like she was holding in a storm. I slipped into the crowd, not to blend in, but to observe. That's when I saw it. The first crack. My Aunt Beverly, Dad's younger sister, was whispering to someone with raised brows and a stiff expression. Then another cousin leaned in. A hand touched a shoulder. A phone passed from palm to palm. A ripple was moving through the guests. Not a wave, not yet. Just that subtle current that signals something beneath the surface has started to shift. I moved closer, just near enough to hear a snippet. "He what?" The text said prenup. That can't be real. This is his wedding night. The unraveling had begun. I didn't start it, but I also wasn't going to stop it. Not this time. For years, I had been the fixer, the smoother-over, the one who filled in silences with forced smiles and light-hearted jokes. I made holidays easier. I made family drama quieter. I made them more comfortable with my erasure, but not anymore. I passed the gift table. My wrapped photo still sat unopened, unacknowledged. Without thinking, I slipped it quietly into my clutch. Not because I was bitter, because it didn't belong to them anymore. That memory, that moment of us as kids, it had always meant something to me. But not if it was going to sit among wedding blenders and cash envelopes like just another piece of Colin's new narrative. It was mine, and I was taking it back. Near the bar, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned to see Theo's mother, Celeste. Elegant, quiet, razor-sharp in posture and presence. She looked at me with eyes that had clearly absorbed the tension hanging in the air like perfume. "Elise," she said, "would you join me for a moment?" She didn't ask twice. She led me to a small lounge off the main hall, one of those curated spaces with overstuffed chairs and soft jazz playing through unseen speakers. "Theo told me what you saw," she said, the moment the door clicked shut. "About the messages, about the way he's being positioned like a stepping stone." I sat across from her, unsure where this was going. "Do you believe him?" I asked. Her eyes didn't flinch. "I've watched Colin for over a year, the curated Instagram captions, the way he speaks about branding his relationship. He's polished, but he's not honest." She let the words settle, then leaned forward slightly. "You need to know, I supported this marriage because I believed it was mutual, that they loved each other. But now..." She exhaled slowly. "If he's leveraging my son's heart as a resume bullet, I won't stand for it." I didn't expect that. From anyone. Not after all these years of watching people excuse Colin's ambition as drive, watching my parents bend their values for the sake of keeping the golden child spotless. But here was someone else, someone powerful, drawing a line. "He told me I was added last minute," I said softly. "You were," she confirmed. "Theo fought for you to be here." I looked down. "He shouldn't have had to." Celeste nodded, slow and precise. "You're not wrong, but you're here now, and if things unravel tonight, which I believe they will, don't carry the blame." I looked up. "You think it's going to blow up?" Her expression was measured. "No." She paused. "I think it's already started." I left the lounge more certain than I had felt all night. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. It was going to be an unveiling, and I didn't need to yell, didn't need to accuse, didn't need to burn it all down. The truth was already dripping through the cracks they worked so hard to cover. I just had to stand still long enough for everyone else to see it. I always thought emotional journeys started with a dramatic event, an explosion, a betrayal, a tearful confession in a rainstorm. Mine began in silence, not the kind you notice at first, but the kind that builds like water behind a dam, quiet, steady, invisible, until the cracks begin to show. By the time I returned to the ballroom, I realized I wasn't looking for confrontation anymore. I was watching, tracking the little signs that something beneath the polished surface was shifting, like following tremors before an earthquake. Theo had reappeared, but something in his posture had changed. No more forced smiles, no more glances toward Colin. He stood near the dessert table, his fingers tracing the stem of a champagne glass he hadn't touched. Across the room, Colin was still performing, laughing too loud, gesturing too big. His voice was just a few decibels above the music, as if he were trying to outrun a rumor he hadn't realized had already reached the edges of the room. Serena moved like a satellite, hovering near him, circling, but never quite connecting. And my parents? They were seated, stiff. My mother's mouth was tight, her hands folded so perfectly in her lap that it looked painful. My father, who had said barely a word all evening, looked like he was watching someone else's child spiral and wasn't sure if, or when, to intervene. I hovered near the perimeter, sipping water now, my coat folded over my arm. Guests passed me, some nodding vaguely, some not at all. A few gave me looks I couldn't read. Then Abby, my cousin, one of the few relatives I hadn't completely given up on, appeared at my side. "Hey," she said softly. "You doing okay?" I looked at her. She wasn't fake smiling, she wasn't pitying me either. "Not really," I admitted. She exhaled. "Good, because I'm not either." That caught me off guard. "I thought I was the only one," I said. Abby scoffed. "Colin made my dad give a speech about how he inspired him to be a man. My dad? The man who forgot my birthday 3 years in a row?" I blinked. She leaned closer. "This whole thing is fake, Elise. It's like an ad campaign with free hors d'oeuvres. I'm just glad someone finally stopped pretending." I stared at her, the corners of my mouth twitching. "Did I?" I asked. "Stop pretending?" She nodded. "Yeah. The minute you walked out and came back looking like you weren't asking for permission anymore." That stayed with me. For years, I had thought invisibility was something that happened to me, a passive state, a slow fade into the background. But what if part of me had agreed to it? What if I had bought into the belief that the only way to keep peace was to disappear? What if stepping back into that ballroom wasn't just a return, it was a re-entry into myself? I looked at Abby. "Thank you." She grinned. "You gonna blow the whole place up?" I shook my head. "No," I said, "but I'm not leaving until they see what they built." The string quartet began playing again, an elegant, dramatic arrangement of Clair de Lune. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it sounded like a countdown. I could feel it, the moment approaching. People were whispering now, conversations took on a more urgent tilt, glances were exchanged, cell phones checked. Colin was checking his watch too often. Serena had disappeared from his side. Celeste stood across the room near a fireplace, arms crossed, jaw set. This was no longer a wedding. It was a pressurized room, and the air was about to go thin. Then someone tapped a glass with a fork. Everyone quieted. A man in his 50s, one of Colin's law partners, stood up, holding a card. "If I could have your attention for just a moment," he began, voice polished, practiced, "I'd like to propose a toast to the man of the hour." I saw Theo glance toward me. Then he stood up. "Actually," Theo said, interrupting gently, "if it's okay, I'd like to say something first." The room stilled. The law partner sat. Serena returned from the hallway, eyes wide, heels clicking like gunshots as she rushed to her seat. Colin smiled, tight and awkward. "Now?" he whispered. Theo nodded. "Now." Theo didn't raise a glass. He didn't clear his throat or thank anyone. He just looked at Colin. "When we met," he began, "I thought I'd finally found someone who wanted the same things as me. Honesty, loyalty, a life we could build, Not for other people, but for us. The crowd leaned in. But I realized something recently, he continued. You weren't building a life, you were curating an image, and somewhere in that process, I stopped being a person to you. I became a tool. A wave of murmurs rippled. Colin stood up, face flushed. Theodore, don't do this. Theo turned toward the guests. You all came here to witness a love story. I wanted to believe in it too, but this wasn't built on love, it was built on leverage, on strategy, on optics. He looked back at Colin. And I'm done being part of it. Gasps, hands over mouths, forks dropped. Colin's face had gone pale. My mother whispered something to my father, who remained completely still. Celeste moved to stand behind Theo, her presence a quiet but unwavering force. Serena didn't move at all. And I? I didn't look away. Not this time. This wasn't rage. This wasn't drama. This was truth. Quiet, steady, unapologetic, and it was unraveling everything they'd tried to stage. When Theo sat back down, the silence was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Not the silence I knew growing up, the one that followed my voice when I asked a question no one answered. This was different. This was the silence that came after truth. After a lie had been shattered so cleanly, no one dared pretend they didn't hear the sound. Colin remained standing for a beat too long, blinking like a man trying to figure out whether he'd just been slapped or offered a second chance. He opened his mouth to speak, closed it, then slowly sat back down. It was over. Not the wedding, not the reception. Those things would limp on. But the story? The illusion? The family image Colin and my parents had clung to like a silk tablecloth over a rotting table, that was unraveling thread by thread. I could have walked out right then, could have dropped the moment like a mic and disappeared back into my quiet apartment across the bridge. But I didn't, because something strange was happening in that stillness. People weren't avoiding my gaze anymore, they were seeking it. A woman I barely recognized, an old friend of my mother's from college, passed by and murmured, "That was brave." Someone else, Serena's cousin, I think, touched my arm lightly and said, "I always wondered if it was just me. Thank you." And then, the last person I expected to hear from, my father. He found me near the far wall, where I'd slipped away after Theo's speech. His tie was slightly askew. His hands were deep in his pockets, the way they always were when he felt uncomfortable. "Elise," he said softly, "do you have a minute?" I nodded. He looked around, then motioned to a smaller side room. Quiet, curtained off from the rest. Inside, he took a breath, then another. "I didn't know you weren't on the original guest list," he said. "I assumed your mother had handled everything. I thought you'd declined." I didn't respond. "I'm not saying that as an excuse," he added quickly. "I'm saying it because I need you to hear me when I tell you. I should have checked. I should have noticed." This man, who'd spent most of my life in meetings, boardrooms, and quiet corners of our house, suddenly looked older than I remembered. Not weak, just tired of pretending, maybe. "I see now," he said, "how easy it was to let Colin take the spotlight, and how hard it was to admit we built that spotlight around him." I swallowed hard. "Do you see me now?" I asked. His face crumpled slightly. "I do." He took a step forward. "And I'm sorry it took this long." I nodded. That was all I had in me, not forgiveness, not rage, just a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes the people who love you the most are also the ones who make you disappear without realizing it. He didn't ask for a hug. I didn't offer one. It wasn't a moment of healing. It was a moment of honesty. And that somehow was enough. When I stepped back into the ballroom, I spotted Serena standing alone. Her hands were clasped in front of her, still and tight. Her perfect updo now had a stray curl falling near her ear. She looked like she was waiting to be told what to do next. I didn't walk toward her. But she saw me, and in that moment, something passed between us that I can't fully explain. Not an apology, not a truce, just recognition. Maybe she had always known what this family was. Maybe she was just better at performing. Or maybe, just like me, she was realizing she'd been cast in someone else's show. I stayed for 30 more minutes, long enough to watch my mother excuse herself from conversations with an apologetic smile, long enough to see Colin try, twice, to approach Theo, only to have Celeste step between them with the kind of quiet grace that says, "Not tonight." Long enough to see my own name written in the margins of whispered conversations. I wasn't the secret anymore. And oddly, that didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel free. When I finally gathered my coat and headed for the exit, I passed Diane, the planner, again. She gave me a small nod. "Quite a night," she said. I offered a tired smile. That's one way to put it. And just as I turned to leave, she added something else. "For what it's worth, if you ever plan your own wedding someday, I hope they seat you at the head table." It was such a strange comment, but it landed, because I knew now that I didn't want a seat someone gave me out of pity or guilt. I wanted a seat I chose, one I built myself. I stepped outside. The air was crisp and sharp. The wind had picked up, but I didn't feel small anymore, because somewhere between walking away from a table I was never meant to sit at and standing beside a man brave enough to tell the truth, I had remembered something I hadn't felt in years. I was worth more than what they gave me. There's a strange kind of quiet that follows public shame. It isn't peace. It isn't resolution. It's more like emotional dust settling after something cracked open, revealing the rot no one wanted to name. That's what the ballroom felt like. Not chaotic, not explosive, just exposed. Like everyone had realized at the same time that they had bought into a lie and now didn't know where to put their hands or their words. I didn't leave right away. Even after the conversations died down and the playlist tried to liven the air with pop songs no one danced to, I stayed. I wanted to see the aftermath, not out of vengeance, out of curiosity. Because when a family like mine has built its image on perfection for decades, what happens when the mask slips in front of everyone? At table 1, my mother sat like a statue carved out of politeness. Her smile was still in place, but it had become disconnected from her eyes, her spine, her very skin. Beside her, my father spoke lowly to a man I didn't know well, someone from the city council or one of Colin's investment firms. His tone was even, but his fingers tapped restlessly against his wine glass. Colin had vanished. Theo, too. And Serena? She was seated but looked like she was somewhere far off, like her body had stayed out of obligation, but her soul had walked out into the dark. I walked through the room, quietly, slowly. That was when I noticed it. The polite smiles, dozens of them, forced, mechanical, the kind that stretched too wide, with teeth but no warmth. Guests pretending nothing had happened, that the groom hadn't just been publicly called out by the man he married 20 minutes ago. "Let's not make it worse," someone muttered as I passed. "It's a family matter." Yes, that's what they always said when things got uncomfortable. Family matter. A pretty little phrase that covers 1,000 sins. I paused near the gift table again. Most of the envelopes were gone now, swept away by an assistant. The table looked thinner, exposed, just like everything else. A woman, probably Serena's aunt, approached me. "You're Elise, right?" I nodded. She leaned in slightly. "I just want you to know, I always thought it was odd how your parents talked about Colin like he was an only child." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" She shook her head gently. "Not to you. To them. For shrinking the space you were allowed to take up." Then she walked away. Just like that. And it hit me. People had seen it. Maybe not clearly, maybe not consciously, but deep down, they'd felt the imbalance, the offness, the unnatural gravity pulling everything toward Colin, while I had quietly slipped further from the center of every story. And suddenly I wasn't just witnessing their unraveling, I was beginning to understand mine. This wedding wasn't just the scene of rejection, it was the mirror. And it was showing me exactly how many years I'd spent making myself smaller, so other people didn't have to feel guilty for overlooking me. That night, I realized something else. My family didn't just forget me, they benefited from my absence. Because the more invisible I became, the easier it was for them to build a version of our family that looked neat, curated, unchallenged. One golden son, two perfect parents. And me? A distant name they could say with a shrug when someone asked, "Does Colin have siblings?" That's what polite smiles cover. Not kindness, control. At the dessert table, I found myself standing beside one of Colin's old teammates. We hadn't spoken in years, but he looked over at me now with raised brows. "Well, that was something," he said, taking a sip of his drink. I shrugged. "Something it needed to be." He nodded slowly. "Colin's always been intense." I turned to face him. Intense is being passionate about your work. Colin's been enabled. There's a difference. He looked at me. Really looked this time. "Didn't know you had that in you." "That's the point," I said. No one bothered to look. By the time I reached the back of the room, where the band had taken a break and a few guests were quietly slipping out, I spotted Celeste. She stood with a glass of red wine, untouched. Her posture was straight, but her expression was thoughtful, like someone cataloging what had been said, who had reacted, who hadn't. I approached her. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You saw it, didn't you?" I asked. "All of it," she replied. "And probably more than I wanted to." She paused. "Your mother hasn't looked me in the eye since the speech." "She's trying to decide if this is salvageable," I said. "It's not," Celeste replied. Her voice wasn't angry. It was resolved. She looked at me for a long moment. "You didn't break anything tonight, Elise." I tilted my head. "Didn't I?" She smiled, soft, sad. "You didn't break it. You just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." And that was the truth no one ever says at weddings. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is not smile. Sometimes you love people enough to tell the truth even when it makes you the villain in their perfect family portrait. There's a particular kind of cruelty that hides behind the word practical. It doesn't scream, it doesn't slap, it smiles and explains why you weren't included, why your name was left off, why your seat was by the door and not at the table. It just made more sense this way. We had so many guests to consider. "You're so easygoing, we knew you wouldn't mind." And suddenly, what should have felt like a betrayal becomes something you're supposed to apologize for noticing. That's how they humiliated me, quietly. Not in front of a crowd, not with shouts or slurs, but with logistics, with a place card, with a missing name on a list, with a hallway table beside a mop bucket. And the moment I dared to name it, I became the problem. I saw it in their eyes now, my parents, their friends, Colin's colleagues, the way they looked at me after Theo's speech, after the photo got reclaimed, after I stood still and watched the story fall apart. She's making this harder than it needs to be. As if I had shattered something delicate, instead of just pointing out that it was already broken. Later that night, after the band resumed and the remaining guests pushed through their discomfort with champagne and forced laughter, I overheard my mother talking to one of her friends. They didn't see me standing just around the corner near the coat check. "I love her," she was saying, "but Elise she complicates things. Colin's life is already so busy. We didn't want drama. We just wanted the day to be easy." Easy. That word hit harder than expected, because it told me everything. I wasn't exiled because I'd done something wrong. I was exiled because I was inconvenient. I stood there, heart thudding, as the friend offered a sympathetic noise. "She's just different from the rest of you," the woman said. "Exactly," my mother sighed. "She never quite fit." There it was, in 7 words. She never quite fit. That's what they told themselves when they left me off the guest list. That's what made them put me near the service door. That's what justified pretending I didn't exist for most of my adult life. I walked away quietly. There was no use confronting her. Not now. What was left to say? I had already watched her choose Colin at every crossroads of our family story. Every holiday. Every family vacation. Every emergency. He was the one they called first. the one they deferred to, the one who got grace when I only got expectations. The problem had never been me complicating things. The problem was I remembered, and I was no longer willing to shrink in order to make space for their comfort. A guest tried to stop me near the dessert table. "Elise, you look lovely tonight," she offered, her voice coated in social varnish. I smiled. "You should have seen me when I was seated next to the mop closet. That was my best look." She laughed, nervously, then drifted away. Good. Let them feel a little awkward. I had felt invisible for years. They could survive 30 seconds of eye contact. I moved toward the main entrance, thinking I might finally leave. But as I passed the open doors of the bridal lounge, I saw Serena sitting inside, alone. Her veil removed, her makeup slightly smudged near one corner. Her heels were off. Her hands were in her lap, fingers twisting slowly around her engagement ring. For a second, I thought about walking on, but something in her posture stopped me. She didn't look like a bride anymore. She looked like someone who had just realized she'd walked into a life that was never really hers. I stepped in without knocking. She didn't look up. "Did you know?" I asked softly. She blinked, slowly, then nodded. Not all of it, but enough to know this wasn't love. Her voice was flat, tired. "So why go through with it?" She shrugged. "Because I'd already planned the day, because the invitations were sent, because my mother said it was too late to back out." She finally looked at me. "Because I thought I could control it better once I was inside the machine." The machine. That's what she called our family. She wasn't wrong. "You were never the villain," she said. I tilted my head. "Really?" Because I'm pretty sure I was cast as one somewhere between the salad course and Theo's speech. She gave a dry laugh. You were just the only one willing to call the machine what it is." She looked back down at her ring. "I think I was hoping you'd do something tonight, something that would blow it open, something I couldn't." That made me pause. "So you knew they seated me by the service door?" She nodded. "I didn't fight it, and I should have. I'm sorry." It wasn't absolution, it wasn't friendship, but it was honesty. And that was enough. As I stepped back out of the lounge, the DJ announced the couple's first dance. There was a beat of hesitation in the room. And then Theo stepped out. Alone. He walked to the center of the floor, where the spotlight now felt more like an interrogation lamp than a celebration. The music started, slow, string-heavy. Colin never appeared. Gasps fluttered through the room like wind disturbing a chandelier. I turned away before the murmurs rose too high. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them finally see the cracks they tried to call practical. Because nothing about tonight had been an accident. Not the exclusion, not the whispers, not the unraveling. It was all built, decision by decision, smile by smile, excuse by excuse. And now that the machine had stalled, everyone was suddenly wondering who had been behind the wheel. I didn't know I was planning anything. Not yet, not really. But something shifted the moment I stepped out of the bridal lounge and back into the main room. It was in the silence that met Theo's first dance, the one no one joined. It was in the eyes that looked away when I passed. And most of all, it was in my breath, steady and calm, even though I had just been publicly humiliated by my own blood. That's when I knew something had changed. They could no longer hurt me quietly, because I wasn't willing to play quietly anymore. The DJ moved on to another track, cheerful, tone-deaf. Only a handful of guests still danced, pretending to enjoy themselves. I slipped past them unnoticed. I'd been doing that my whole life. But this time, it wasn't submission. It was strategy. I circled around the ballroom to the side entrance that led to the venue office. I had seen the coordinator slip in earlier. The room likely had access to the guest list, contracts, and vendor files. I didn't need to sabotage anything. I just needed to see, to know for certain what I had already suspected. The door was cracked. No one was inside. I stepped in quickly, gently pulling the folder labeled Reception Plan, Sinclair and Carter. And there it was, bold, printed, organized alphabetically, guest seating list. Table 1, bride, groom, parents of the groom, parents of the bride, maid of honor, best man. Table 2, corporate partners from Sinclair Development. Table 3, out-of-state donors. Table 4, mayor, city officials, dean of Stanford Law. I scanned down to table 17, Elise Carter. No title, no relation listed, but next to my name, in parentheses, overflow vendor support area. That's how they did it. They seated me with the waitstaff and backup photographers, not because there wasn't space, but because it kept me out of frame. And if I hadn't shown up, if I had declined the invitation they sent late, they would have said I couldn't make it. That I was so independent now, that I was off doing her own thing. They built the perfect story, one where I excluded myself. I didn't cry, I laughed, quietly, bitterly, the way you do when you're not surprised anymore, just tired of being polite about it. And then I took a photo, not for social media, not to expose them. For me, a receipt. Because silent revenge isn't always about fireworks. Sometimes it begins with documentation. Back in the ballroom, the night was winding down. Theo was nowhere to be seen. Serena sat at her table alone, now in a simple shawl, her makeup long wiped clean. Guests whispered but didn't approach. My mother stood near the bar, speaking to the venue manager about departure times and champagne surcharges. I approached calmly. "Do you have a moment?" I asked. She turned, startled but not unkind. "Of course." I held up my phone. Table 17, overflow, vendor support area. Her lips parted. "Elise, You didn't think I'd notice, did you?" I kept my voice steady. Cold. "It was just a matter of space." "No, it was a matter of hierarchy, of control, of where I fit into the image you wanted to present today." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. That's not what this moment needed. She tried again. "We didn't mean to hurt you." "No," I said, pocketing my phone. "You meant to ignore me. The hurt was a side effect, one you accepted." And then I walked away. I passed the photo table where the family portraits had been taken. A large print of Colin, my parents, and Serena stood on display. I stared at it, then gently tilted it forward so it lay flat on the linen cloth. Not broken, just no longer on a pedestal. Silent, final. Outside, the cool night air pressed against my skin like relief. I walked past the valet stand, past the row of expensive cars. Mine was parked on the street. No one had offered me a reserved space. Of course they hadn't, but I preferred it this way. No one sees you coming when they've trained themselves to look past you. Inside my car, I sat for a moment, staring at the venue lights through the windshield. This wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was the start of something. Not rage, readiness. Because the thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to build quietly, room to move without notice, room to gather every insult, every omission, every practical cruelty, and stack them into something precise, measured, irrefutable. This wasn't the night I got even. This was the night I stopped apologizing, the night I stopped translating their insults into grace, the night I let the silence stretch long enough for them to hear their own cruelty echo back, the night I took my first breath outside of the machine. By morning, the gossip had already started. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't said a word on social media. But someone at the wedding must have whispered the wrong name to the wrong person at the wrong time, because when I checked my phone, there were 3 unread texts from extended cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. "Did something happen last night? I heard Theo made a speech." "Someone said you weren't on the real seating list? Is that true?" "Whatever went down, I'm proud of you." I hadn't expected that last one, and I didn't know I needed it until I read it twice. The next message came from Theo. "Call me when you can. Everything's changing." I didn't respond right away, not because I was angry, but because I was tired. Tired of having to explain what I'd spent my whole life silently enduring. Tired of being the quiet one who never made a scene. But maybe, finally, it was time to make one. I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. No shouting, no lawsuits, no tabloid posts. I wanted something cleaner, more permanent. I wanted my voice. The invitation arrived 2 days later. An email from Carter Core's board asking if I would be willing to say a few words at the company's upcoming Legacy Gala, a black tie event celebrating 50 years of family business, innovation, and philanthropy. Apparently, the previous speaker, Colin, had backed out. They asked if I could fill in. Funny how fast silence turns into an asset when your golden boy disappears. I said yes, but only under one condition. I would write my own speech. No review, no edits, no PR polishing. Surprisingly, they agreed. Maybe they thought I'd play nice. Maybe they forgot I was raised in the same house as Colin and learned the game just as well, only in silence. The night of the gala arrived quietly. Rain tapped the windows of the downtown venue as black cars pulled up one by one. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with soft lighting and 100 curated smiles. I wore navy, not black, not red, nothing loud, just enough to look like I belonged, because I did. But my seat wasn't with the family this time. It was at the head table, and my name card had no asterisk. After the wine was poured and the entree cleared, the lights dimmed. A board member took the stage and read the standard preamble about legacy, ethics, generational growth. Then she introduced me. No fanfare, no pre-written bio. Just, please welcome Elise Carter, who's agreed to share a few thoughts tonight as both a family member and a witness to the Carter legacy. Applause, polite, restrained. I stood, walked calmly to the podium, and let the silence stretch. Not too long, just enough. Thank you, I began, my voice even. When I was younger, I thought legacy was something inherited, like a house, or a name, or a title at the head of a boardroom table. I paused, scanning the audience. Some nodded, expecting another safe corporate fable, but I wasn't here to soothe anyone. I used to sit at the kids' table during these galas, not because I was a child, but because no one remembered to move my name card. It was never malicious, I was told, just an oversight, a logistical error, someone else's job. Laughter, tense. I continued. What I've come to understand is that legacy is not what you pass down, it's what you build into others. It's the space you make for someone when you don't need to. Eyes shifted. I saw my mother stiffen. I saw an uncle lower his glass mid-sip. I saw someone else smile just slightly. For years, I thought I was invisible because I hadn't done enough to be seen. But the truth is, you can't be seen if someone's already decided where you don't belong. I leaned forward just a bit. And yet, here I am, speaking into a microphone someone else assumed I'd never hold. Silence. Real, full silence. I wrapped up cleanly. No jabs, no names, no wounds reopened, just one final thought. My family legacy isn't defined by what was kept from me. It's defined by what I've chosen to keep for myself: integrity, clarity, and a voice no one else gets to narrate. And then I stepped back. The applause started slowly, surprised, then stronger. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. Afterward, I stood alone near the gallery of family portraits. A few guests stopped by to say kind things. Some simply nodded in solidarity. My mother didn't speak to me, but I didn't expect her to. Colin was still silent wherever he was. Theo had sent flowers. Serena sent a text. Thank you for saying it out loud. And that was enough. Not revenge, not retribution, but something better. Resolution. Legacy, as they once told me, was something you earned your way into. They didn't say it with words. They said it with tables, name cards, and silence. They said it when they left me out of photos, out of speeches, out of decisions. And for a long time, I believed them. That I hadn't done enough to belong. That legacy was something I had to catch up to, always just beyond reach. But standing at the gala that night, after the applause faded and the lights came back on, I finally understood. I had never been reaching. I had been building. 2 weeks after the event, I walked into Carter Core's headquarters, not as a visitor, not as someone's daughter, and certainly not as Colin's shadow. I walked in as an independent advisor, officially contracted to help restructure the company's philanthropic wing. a decision quietly approved by the board after seeing how many stakeholders responded positively to my speech. Apparently, clarity was good for business. My mother hadn't responded to my messages. That was fine. Theo had. He invited me to coffee. We talked. He wasn't trying to get me back. He just wanted to say something he should have said years ago. "I never spoke up," he admitted, staring into his cup, "because I thought your silence meant you were okay, and I didn't want to risk getting pushed out too." I nodded. "We were all performing," I said, "just for different audiences." We clinked coffee mugs like some broken peace offering. As for Colin, I never heard from him, but I didn't need to. I had seen the company memo. He'd stepped down from his board role temporarily, citing stress, family matters, and the usual vague exits men with too much power and too little character use when things collapse. There was no scandal, just absence. And sometimes absence is enough. I visited my father's grave the next weekend. It was sunny, uncomfortably warm for late fall, the kind of weather that makes you remember how short time is. I sat on the small granite bench beside the plot and said nothing for a while. When I finally spoke, it was simple. "You were right about legacy," I whispered, "but not in the way you thought." He had once told me, back when I was 12 and crying after a school play where I forgot my lines, "Legacy isn't applause, Elise. It's who keeps standing when the clapping stops." I hadn't understood it then. I do now. After the visit, I drove past the old Carter estate, the one I'd once lived in, the one with the impossible staircase and the cold marble foyer. It had been sold. A real estate sign leaned slightly in the wind, advertising a new luxury development. They called it Legacy Heights. I smiled. How poetic. The last letter came a month later, handwritten, no return address. Short. "You were always braver than the rest of us. I wish I'd seen that sooner. Serena." I held the note for a long time. Not because it changed everything, but because it acknowledged what couldn't be undone. And that's where I'll leave it. No dramatic final strike, no broken glass or courtroom scenes, just a woman who was pushed into a hallway and learned she could build her own door. That was the legacy I reclaimed. Not the name, not the seat, not the silent nods of approval, but the voice, the clarity, the refusal to vanish. Because revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks into a room, calm, visible, and never asks to be seated again. As someone who's lived through quieter betrayals, I believe stories like Elise's matter deeply. Not because they promise perfect justice, but because they show that dignity is a decision, not a gift. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about removing yourself from a structure that needed you small and refusing to shrink for comfort again. It reminds us that sometimes the most powerful revenge is becoming undeniable, and that's a legacy no one can take from you. If this story touched you, subscribe to Secret Revenge, because some revenge needs no knives, no screaming, just one spotlight, one shining nameplate, and someone they once dismissed, rising, brilliant and unshaken. See you in the next story.